The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's a blockbuster report out from the Associated Press which says that there are immigrant U.S. military recruits and reservists who enlisted with the promise of this path to citizenship, who are being quietly but abruptly, and in some cases without even an explanation, discharged short of meeting the requirements to obtain that citizenship. So if this sounds foreign to you, a lot of people don't know that this exists. I actually know an Italian guy who did it, where if you have legal status in the United States before enlisting, like not if you're here just visiting, but if you're here on a student visa, and by visiting, I mean not if you're just visiting New York for a week, right? If you're here on a student visa, if you have other legal status in the US, you can enlist in the military. You then are required to get an honorable service designation, and you are then allowed to be naturalized as an American citizen. And the idea behind it is pretty clear, which is that if you choose to join the American military, if you choose to fight for the United States, then you get citizenship. It's not that controversial. It's a way to earn citizenship. And some of these immigrant service members are in the middle of the process, and they're being discharged without even being told why. Some others have been told that they represent security risks because they have relatives in other countries. The Pentagon has been asked for comment. They are not commenting as of right now. The Army has been asked for comment. They are not saying anything about it at this time. And hopefully, we'll get to the bottom of this. But the trend is clear. And the trend is that the same anti-immigrant forces who forget that this country was built on immigrants seem to also be forgetting that the U.S. Army, too, was built on immigrants. Immigrants have been in the U.S. Army since 1775. Immigrants in the American military are part of why the United States ultimately won the Revolutionary War and won independence. But it's almost like, who am I talking to, right? Most of the people that are listening to me say this know this. And if you don't, or you don't care, then I'm not going to convince you anyway. And so really, I think the conversation needs to be focused on the reality that this is a cruel, it's cruel for no reason, but it's also counterproductive. Why would we choose to kick people out of the United States by virtue of kicking them out of the Army or other branches of the military, short of obtaining citizenship? Why would we do that when they have chosen to join the American military and make that sacrifice? I thought those, according to Trump, were the immigrants we did want. Well, maybe not if they're not white and from Norway. I don't know. I want nothing to do with military service myself. And the reason that I was never drafted, the reason we don't have a draft, is because there are people who are willing to volunteer. Why would we kick those people out if they're willing to volunteer?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like it's not just anti-illegal immigration, it's anti-immigration, which
Period.
Republicans claim that they're not. And it's also anti-military in a sense because you're discouraging people from enlisting, right? If you are here on legal status, you join the military expecting to get citizenship, and all of a sudden it's taken away from you and you're kicked out of the military, why would you want to do that in the first place? Why would another person sign up for that?
People aren't exactly breaking down the doors to join the military, I think is the point that Pat is making. Recruiting has been troubled for a long time now. Not so troubled that we need a draft, but troubled enough that recruiting is an ongoing concern for the military. We're now kicking out willing recruits, and the lawsuits are starting. We have no idea where it will end up. We have no idea what position the Trump administration will ultimately take on this, if any. And this is starting to go beyond just an indifference to immigrants or a hostility to immigrants. This military policy, which again, we've still not actually gotten an explanation for what is going on and why it's going on and who's directing it. This is starting to take the shape of a proactive plan to cleanse the institutions of our country of non-white immigrants, period, starting with vulnerable people like those who joined the military as part of this program to obtain citizenship. How far will it go? Sadly, it's probably going to go quite a bit further than it has so far. I don't think that this is even close to the end of what we will see under this administration unless we put a stop to it, at least partially, in November by actually going out and voting. It's about a year overdue, but corrupt crony capitalist clown Scott Pruitt, Donald Trump's EPA director, has finally been forced to resign his position at the EPA, adding on to the very long and growing list of Donald Trump top-level resignations or forced resignations, or some people call them firings. To call Scott Pruitt beleaguered would be an understatement. The countless ethics investigations into everything from using lobbyist condos for $50 a night, his absurd first-class travel expenditures of taxpayer money, having EPA staff do special favors for him personally that have nothing to do with his role as a cabinet member, and just being an all-around horrible person and leading an agency that he regularly tried to hamper via lawsuits before he was its director. And in his resignation letter, Pruitt says that one of the reasons he's resigning are the, quote, unrelenting attacks on him personally. The reason he's being attacked is because he's horribly corrupt and terrible for the environment that he's supposed to be protecting. But that's expected, right? These guys will always say it's not that they did something wrong, it's that it's become a distraction because of the unfair targeting of them for the things they allegedly did wrong, of course.
Well, it's impolite. We got to be civil here. It's impolite to target them in such a way.
We need to police our tone, actually, when we talk about all of the misdeeds of Scott Pruitt. And even though it's being called a resignation, Trump told him it's time for him to resign. In more practical terms, we call that getting fired. And reportedly what pushed Donald Trump over the edge was that it leaked to the media that Pruitt previously asked Donald Trump to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions so that Pruitt could run the Justice Department. And apparently news of that was just too embarrassing to Trump. It's an absolute and total comedy of errors. And as I've been saying all along, just because Pruitt should be out doesn't mean it'll get better if you replace him. And case in point, with no delay whatsoever, Monday, acting EPA director Andrew Wheeler takes over, a former coal lobbyist. You couldn't predict this, except that it was completely predictable as soon as we realized that drain the swamp was actually fill the swamp.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the environment will worsen at the same rate that it was before,
Of
right?
course,
Andrew
even
Wheeler
faster, maybe.
Isn't much better, but maybe there will be fewer scandals, and we can take that as a tiny bit of a win.
That can be a win, but it also can be a loss, in the same way that if Pence took over for Trump, fewer scandals and constant faux pas would probably mean that Pence would get more of his agenda done. In the same way, Andrew Wheeler, coal lobbyist Andrew Wheeler, might actually get more environmental destruction done by being less scandal-ridden than Scott Pruitt was. Pruitt, candidate, cabinet member number 5 to be forced out. We had Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Homeland Security, and now number 5, EPA Director. And of course, we can add to that CIA Director James Comey being fired, Press Secretary Sean Spicer going, National Security Advisor already on number 4 after the indictment of Michael Flynn, some interim guy whose name I don't even remember, followed by H.R. McMaster going. And I'm not even going to get into White House Communications Director, where there have been 5 plus dozens and dozens of other roles. Now, if you're worried about Scott Pruitt's future, and I don't think that many people in our audience are, he's done enough as EPA director to help the polluters make more money that he is going to have no problem getting some really sweet lobbying gig.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted to be Attorney General, right? There's now a new opening at the Supreme Court. Maybe he could throw his hat in the ring.
Why not, right? And the real tragedy here is that because Pruitt resigned, he's mostly going to be forgotten. He should be investigated because the guy's behavior as director of the EPA is potentially criminal. It's not out of bounds to think he might be deserving of prison time, but when you resign, you do your damage, you do your hatchet job, and then you disappear into lucrative lobbying or whatever. Political resignation leads to no prosecution. That's the American way, when in reality, the consequences should now begin now that he's back to being a private citizen. There is a lawyer named Lanny Davis who is very much hated by the American right wing, and he's hated not only because he's a Democrat, but because he's also a close friend of Bill and Hillary Clinton's. And he's also a Democratic strategist and public relations consultant, a well-known one who has worked for a number of prominent Democrats. He has now been hired by, note the use of the word former Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen. This is fascinating. And to catch you up on Michael Cohen, Cohen was Trump's personal lawyer. He was involved in the $130,000 payoff to Stormy Daniels. He's in big trouble. His office, condo, and home, and hotel room, rather, were raided by investigators. His lawyers abandoned him. Multiple reports that he's likely going to flip and inform on Donald Trump. And as I've said before, if anybody has dirt on Trump, real dirt on Trump, it's Michael Cohen. And Donald Trump and the Trump administration increasingly pretending they barely even remember who Cohen was. Lanny Davis was asked why he's joining the legal team for Michael Cohen. He said that when he heard Cohen say recently on ABC that his allegiance is to his family and to his country, not to Donald Trump, Lanny Davis was convinced that this was somebody that he felt comfortable or was interested in working with. Lanny Davis notably wrote a book claiming that the election was stolen from Hillary Clinton. And he is now representing the one guy who is most likely to have evidence, if that evidence exists, if it is true, that the election was stolen from Hillary Clinton. That guy is Michael Cohen. So a few different things to think about. Number one, how in trouble is Cohen at this point? What does Cohen know at this point? Michael Cohen is not commenting on the hire. Cohen's other lawyer, Guy Petrillo, also not commenting on the hire. The one possible downside to this that I want to hear from the audience about is, does this make it easier for the right to cast Cohen as a guy seeking revenge rather than justice because he goes and he hires prominent Clinton friend Lanny Davis? That's my question for you. Let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is I said his name incorrectly. Alfred Troisi. That's a difficult one. Alfred Troisi for my non-English speaking native tongue. Also want to say thanks to Carl Codney. That's an easier one. Who has been with us since 2012. Alfred, Carl, thank you for being supporters of the David Pakman Show. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. Let's go to the phone, 617-830-4750. Caller from the 541 area code. Go right ahead. What's on your mind today? 541, can you hear me?
Oh, hi. Sorry.
There you are.
Sorry, yes. I live in the 714 area code now. Sorry, my phone is 541.
Oh, no problem. What's on your mind?
Yes, I have a question. With the intercept reporting on the Trump administration and dealings in the Middle East countries and Israel, why is the mainstream media continuously pushing the Russia scandal?
How are the two things related? I'm not sure I know.
So the scandal seems to be more about the Middle East countries, Saudi Arabia and Israel, more so than Russia. Why
okay, so like, for example, what's the scandal? Let's make sure we are on the same page. What's the scandal with Saudi Arabia, for example? The arms sales?
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the scandal with Israel?
Also arms sales and moving the building to Jerusalem. Gosh darn it! What?
The embassy. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so let's see. Let's break it down into its component parts. Arms sales to Saudi Arabia and Israel. Whether you're for them or against them, it has nothing to do with Trump specifically, right? I mean, that's been going on administration after administration. It doesn't represent any particular change. Trump did escalate the arms sales to Saudi Arabia, but like that's not anything that Trump's campaign did that might have broken campaign finance laws or that could include, witness tampering or the criminality that Mueller is investigating. So I think that you're right that we should, of course, be questioning all proliferation of arms around the world, but I just don't understand the connection to the Russia thing that you're bringing up.
Okay. I will. I'll come back to you with a better question on another date.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well,
we'll
glad I did the best I could with the question I got. I hope it was at least something. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. 617-830-4750. Our next caller is from the 720 area code. Go ahead.
Hi, Packman. My name's Sean, and I live in Colorado. And I think what we're really dealing with in America, and we're missing the major problem here, or the major point, is that the Democratic Party is a party of enablers. They enable the Republican Party to get away with their evil, and even more so than that, even support them at times. Like, they supported the banks, and they supported the deregulation of Wall Street. And what's really going on here is that from the top down, the Democratic establishment is considered leadership. And it has created this idea that in order to be a liberal or in order to be a leftist, you kind of have to be a coward. You know what I mean? That you're not willing to really fight. And what this does is embolden Republicans and allow stuff like the Supreme Court. I mean, like Obama, he had the Supreme Court nomination. If he had any sense of anything, he would have been on TV day in and day out saying the Republicans are un-American, they are going against the Constitution, day after day after day, and made the Republicans pay for it. But he didn't do that because of the fact he kind of agrees with the Republicans, and a lot of the corporate Democrats do. So I think the real issue is that people on the left need to know it's okay to be strong. You know what I mean? It's okay to be like, no, I want health care for people because of the fact I believe that that is a right. And even more so, like, you can even argue from a Christian angle. Like Jesus said, feed the poor, the hungry, the sick, and the needy, you will go to heaven. Those who don't go to hell. Like, there's like so many arguments, but the Democratic Party pretty much just enables the Republicans to do anything they want day after day after day.
So listen, a bunch of good points in there. A couple different things. Number one, you can hold simultaneously the belief that you have just espoused, Sean, which is that a lot of the actions of the Democratic establishment are either supportive of or inadvertently complicit with maintaining the worst elements of the status quo, including how politics is financed, the sort of corporate oligarchy that governs the United States, so on and so forth. You can believe that. And at the same time, when it comes down to who am I voting for, because there are real differences on very important issues between Republicans and Democrats, I'm going to choose to vote for the Democrat. You can hold both of those beliefs. You can also recognize that although we want to break the two-party duopoly, as I've talked about doing with campaign finance reform and ranked choice voting and some of the other means that we've talked about, we still can work within the Democratic Party to primary rightist and corporate Democrats when there are opportunities to do that without doing more self-inflicted harm, and move the Democratic Party to the left to the extent that it's possible. And I really can't disagree with anything you've said, and I think it's just important to remember that everything you said can be true, and yet we can still improve circumstances by voting for some of the right Democrats when we have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, personally, I'm just kind of sick of like corporate Democrats. I think I'm going to vote third party. But if people want to vote Democratic, I'm in complete support of that. I think my major issue is that we need to have a new understanding of what it means to be on the left.
Absolutely.
Because the concept of people on the left is kind of a representation of what the Democrats are, but the donors pick weak Democrats and strong Republicans, and the Republicans just steamroll everything they want through, and people on the left get this sense of, oh, I got to be like the Democrats, you know what I mean? Instead of actually being like, no, this is an issue that I'm willing to fight for, I'm stand for, and I'm even willing to like yell about it, or you know what I mean? It's like we've taken
George Lakoff has a ton of writing on this, and he says Democrats and actual progressives, some of whom are Democrats and some of whom are not, need to start framing their issues, our issues, as actually the patriotic thing to do, right? Hey, listen,
Yeah.
We are a country that values the people within it, and we're going to make sure people have some basic level of health care. We are going to do our patriotic duty to make sure we have the best country possible by paying our taxes, not by trying to give tax cuts to the rich, which is not the patriotic thing to do. It's actually the opposite of patriotism to do that. Lakoff has a lot of good stuff on this, and I wish more people in power on the left read that and maybe took some lessons out of it.
Okay, and I just want to add one thing, and I agree with that. I agree with that. My major point is I think we need to be harsher. Yeah. And I think, like, we need to say the Republicans are immoral. You know what I mean? Like, the biggest problem with Trump is they don't understand he's a bully. Right. And you don't beat a bully by saying you're mean. You know what I mean? You're being mean
Sean,
to me. You say, like...
People are mad at me because I'm saying some of the, it might be time for some tactics to protest what this administration is doing that are going to make people uncomfortable. And I'm getting emails from people saying that my tone is all wrong. What about civility? You're just not going to fight back against what's going on by saying, I respectfully disagree. Please stop what you're doing. It's just someone's going to have to end up uncomfortable. That's just the reality at this point.
Absolutely. And I think the reason that you are getting those emails is because they're following the leadership, quote unquote, of the Democratic establishment itself. So what they see is like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They're like, what if people start getting mean? More people have died in terrorists from right-wing Republicans in the United States than Muslims. Yep. Besides 9/11, obviously, but like since then, so on and so forth. And it's just like we need to be like, no, this is a moral situation, and if you don't think a poor child or a single mother deserves health care or a livable wage, you're
not
immoral.
Very patriotic.
Like this is. Yeah, sorry.
All right, Sean, thank you. Really appreciate it. Points well made, and keep fighting out there. I appreciate what you're doing. Let's go to our next caller from the 318 area code. Caller from 318, go ahead.
Yeah, this is John from Louisiana. I just want to ask your opinion. You probably already have said something about this, but I think, are you sure about this blue wave thing that's coming? Because I believe on the left, we kind of have a little bit of hubris because we just figure that people are going to figure it out, or we're usually right on certain things.
Oh, no. Yeah, I don't know if you've missed some of my recent shows, John. And by the way, if we're on speakerphone or a headset or whatever, by all means, take us off because you're getting a horrible, horrible echo. I have been crying to anyone who will listen to me about it that if you're assuming we're going to get this blue wave, you'd better be registering people to vote and doing all of the things, because I am not at all convinced that we're going to have this blue wave. Because just because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her primary and Doug Jones defeated a serial child sex assaulter in a special election in Alabama and some of these other few incidents, there is nothing guaranteed about this blue wave. Everybody who wants to see the blue wave should best be out there registering people to vote and explaining that if you don't, we're going to have the same thing on November, whatever the date is, that we had the day after the November 2016 election, where everybody's in a daze. How did Trump win? What happened yesterday? Who's the president now? And it's going to be another 2 years of what we've been seeing. So I am by no means assuming there will be a blue wave.
Agreed. That was my question. Thank you, man.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, John, for the call. 318. I don't know where 318 is. We've never gotten a call from that before. Let's go to our next caller from the 725 area code. 725. Go ahead. 725, if maybe you're muted, but we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you are.
This is Stefan from Nevada. Yeah, I was curious as to how you would recommend I prepare for college. I'm going to college in the fall, and so I was wondering what you as a professor would suggest.
Very good. Okay, let's. So here's a couple things. Listen, by the way, most of the advice is not as somebody who has taught in college, but it's more as someone who has gone to college, gone through it, and then gotten out and gone to grad school. Okay, so a couple different things.
Okay, sure.
Number one, do the reading. Now that is me saying it as an instructor. Assuming that the professors have thought the classes out correctly, do the reading, because you are going to get way more out of it. And I know I hated doing the reading, and I didn't always do it when I was a student. You will actually benefit from doing the reading. So do the reading that's assigned. Number two, think about college not so much as a place where the focus is learning the subject matter of the classes, although it is, and you should make every effort to do it. But understand that college is a place primarily to do two things. Number one, to learn how to learn and think, okay? So consider the classes an analogy for learning how to learn and learning how to think. And number two, college is where for a lot of people, depending on whether you're living on campus or not, or moving or whatever, you're actually going to have to figure out a lot of things for yourself that are going to be relevant to the real world when you get out and start working that maybe before your parents helped you out with, or you had teachers in school who would sort of babysit or hold your hands through. At least in larger universities, for the most part, if you don't show up, it's your problem and the repercussions are going to be yours to deal with. If you're not getting the material and you don't tell anybody, you're just going to end up with a bad grade, and it's basically going to be your responsibility. And I think that the people who, I don't know whether success in college in terms of high GPA versus like a medium GPA translates to success in the real world, but I think anecdotally, the people that do best in the real world, Stefan, are the people who in college learn about how it applies to life in a way that maybe before you didn't really have exposure to. So that would be my advice.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
All right, no problem. I thought maybe there'd be a follow-up.
Right. Have a nice day, Dave.
But yeah, have a nice day. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go to our next caller from the 408 area code. 408, go ahead.
Hi, I actually had a question regarding Israel.
Okay.
Do you think it's unfair, despite sort of the disproportionate condemnation Israel gets from the UN, when countries like Saudi Arabia and China are not criticized, that despite all of that, that it is still valid to say that Israel isn't a great ally of the United States, in the sense of that their interests don't really coincide with that of the U.S. I mean, if you sort of look at, a lot of sort of government officials and intelligence people, some of whom that I think you've had on your show, like Lawrence Wilkerson, basically allude to the fact that, whether it's you talk about sort of the attack on the USS Liberty in '67, or sort of what they believe to be as Israeli, coordination potentially with even Sunni extremists in Syria to fight off the Iranians who are ultimately there, that they're not really, even although, obviously you could clearly say that the neighboring countries of Israel are far more odious actors, certainly in the way that they treat their own people, but that Israel in itself is still not really a credible ally in terms of that, maybe the relationship isn't as symbiotic as some of our politicians try to make it seem as it is.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, so let's think about it, right? Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia is a completely deplorable authoritarian theocracy. They behead people in the streets, so on and so forth. But they share American interests in Middle Eastern stability in order to protect the oil flows. We sell them weapons, so on and so forth. Is Saudi Arabia really a great ally of the United States? Not ideologically, except for the fact that you do have a lot of these Christian theocrat types who seem to have no problem doing deals with Saudi Arabia, which just has a Muslim version of the same Christian theocracy that these right-wing ideologues would like. So it depends on how you evaluate the alliance. So now let's talk about Israel. In the same way that the United States and Saudi Arabia have this interest of stability in the Middle East, the U.S. and Israel also share that interest. Now, because of the perverted right-wing Netanyahu regime, which has no interest in peace whatsoever, you would immediately say, well, if the U.S. wants Middle East peace, and Benjamin Netanyahu clearly doesn't because he wouldn't benefit from it, and in fact, he runs his campaigns on the idea that he alone will keep you safe, that all of a sudden doesn't actually seem like a great alliance. So I think what you're bringing up is completely reasonable. I just think you have to think a little more deeply about what we mean when we say alliances. Does the U.S. look
Right.
the other way to Saudi beheadings because of the shared interest in stability? Yes, they do. Does the U.S. look the other way about the reality that Benjamin Netanyahu is not a credible arbiter of peace because of a lot of other reasons which we could talk about? Yes, they do, but we just sort of have to understand how these alliances are built geopolitically.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, although more people are willing to concede the fact that the Saudis are clearly not good allies, but I guess that's more to do with the fact that it's pretty transparent how, I mean, they're might be the most, oppressive regime in the world, maybe
Yes.
outside of North Korea, but
Yeah.
I guess maybe that has to do with it, but yeah.
Appreciate
All
the
right, I
call.
appreciate
Thank you very
your,
much. Yeah,
response.
thank you so much. And on that note, we are out of time. If we didn't get to you, I apologize, but we will take calls again next week. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, well, for this week's classic interview, we are going to go back to my interview with Kevin Sinnott from November of 2015. At the time, we didn't know how the relationship of the David Pakman Show to coffee would explode. Not only do we now have our own two coffee lines, the drip and espresso coffee lines at davidpakman.com/gear, but Pat almost, I would say, almost lost your reputation over what we are now calling the Keurig scandal.
Almost canceled the show.
It almost actually pulled the show off the air, yeah. Hard to believe as it may be. So now with those new revelations, we can watch my interview with Kevin Sinnott from November of 2015 with a fresh perspective is what I'm calling it. Let's check it out. I'm joined today by Kevin Sinnott, author of The Art and Craft of Coffee and the creator and host of CoffeeCon, the Consumer Coffee Festival. It's so great to have you on. I think a lot of people drink coffee. Many people have lots of questions about coffee. And one that I want to jump right into is about fair trade coffee. What is fair trade exactly? And is it really that fair?
Well, the concept is a great concept. And the idea is everyone in a certain region, I guess, region's the wrong word, that's too large. Let's say everyone in a neighborhood pools their coffee together, and the idea is that you get a better deal. And there's a third party involved called a fair trade trader, I guess, and that person is supposed to oversee the deal so that it's good for the farmers and good for the people who are buying the coffee, who are roasters. The challenge with it, David, is that, well, first of all, there's always a challenge in the coffee business. I'm sorry to say that sometimes introducing a third party in the middle increases the risk that the farmers don't get paid rather than lessens it. So that's obviously not the majority of cases, but that's one factor that I hear from farmers occasionally. The other thing is, ideally, if a farmer there's a better deal for farmers, and that's direct trade, and that's where they actually sell directly to the roasters. It seems like they have a better chance of making all the money, and they get a better deal for them. So that's kind of, you'll hear direct trade roasters touting that. So I would say direct trade is ideal. On the other hand, a farmer has to be a certain size usually to get a direct trade deal.
Yeah, I
So
recently spoke to a roaster who does the direct trade route, and they said, the prices they gave me were that fair trade is really only raising the amount that is paid to the farmer from in the low dollar and change range to the high dollar and change range, and that some piece of that is actually going to the third-party organization, as you mentioned, that apparatus that manages the fair trade status, so that it is sort of a label that they don't feel actually tells us very much about how fair the prices being paid are.
To put it in show business terms, it's a manager. A great manager gets you more gigs, and your career does better. And they negotiate a great deal for you. On the other hand, if you're a farmer that is capable of negotiating your own deals, you're probably better off with direct trade.
Okay, all this makes sense. Let's now talk about coffee and health. Coffee and health seems to be studied endlessly. Coffee is sometimes great for you, sometimes it's bad for you. Then it's good as long as it's 2 to 3 cups a day, but not more than 4, or just 1 cup of coffee a day is really great, but beyond that, we have no idea. How do you, as a coffee expert, sort of navigate all of the different opinions and so-called studies about the health impacts of coffee?
Yeah, I'm actually, my background isn't science, my background is history. So I tend to approach it more from a historic point of view that coffee drinkers on average live as long or longer than non-drinkers. So I think coffee is at worst inert. And yes, once in a while you'll hear some claims about antiviral and different effects of coffee that may be good for you, using modern, I guess, health concerns and looks at studies that are done. However, I'm always I'm really resistant to, reluctant to consider coffee itself a so-called health drink. It's just, it seems like it's got some good qualities. On the other hand, people have to be careful, A, what they put into their coffee, which can change those things, and B, what they have along with their coffee, which is probably, something, coffee seems to be forever sold with things that are sweet and while they're delicious, may not be considered healthy.
Right. If you're having a half dozen bear claws with your cup of coffee, that will have an impact if that's what you're doing every time. What's the hot thing right now? I mean, people at homes like to have their French presses. Turkish coffee with the grounds in it is being served at more and more places and more countries around the world, although it doesn't seem to be too popular in the US so far. I was at a place yesterday that had the pour over method, which to me just seemed like you're dripping the coffee from 6 inches instead of 1 inch. I didn't totally understand what the difference was. What's the popular thing now in the coffee world?
Well, I'd say the pour over is the drink of the week, and there is a difference. By the way, I'm going to defend the pour over a little bit.
Please.
The Mr. Coffee pour over is an attempt, a crude attempt, I might add, to automate what was a manual method. And the benefit of the hand pour is that you can see and time things so that all the grounds get nicely extracted and the timing and everything, so that you don't put too much water in, because then there's a lot of water in there that's cooling. And what you want to do is just have enough water that it keeps all the grounds covered. And you do get, I think, a significantly better cup. Now, as I say this, there are automatic methods that are now improving and getting more flexible and even programmable, so that they're better emulating what a great barista could do. But so far, I think the barista wins.
All right, so now there's 2 areas of big controversy around coffee. One is Keurig machines. The other is chain coffee places like Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. Let's talk about the second one first. Are Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks providing good coffee? When I've completely stopped going to those places because I just find that there is nothing at all redeeming about ordering a cup of coffee at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. I prefer the local mom and pop style coffee places.
I prefer a local person for non-taste reasons. It has to do with the same reason I will always call a contractor in the local paper instead of a chain for almost anything. It's just my personal bias. But I definitely have to say there's a difference between the 2 chains. While Dunkin' Donuts does a lighter roast, I prefer a lighter roast personally, generally. Starbucks actually does buy some of the coffees that we're talking about that are fair trade, direct trade. They have shown a better social consciousness, both for the growers and sustainability here at home, which I think is oftentimes not good. You know, they do try to provide things for their employees. So on a social justice point of view, I see a big difference between Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, certainly Starbucks and McDonald's.
Interesting.
Now,
Okay.
back to the cost, or rather the taste. I would agree. Starbucks has chased automation to a degree that you really don't get best a barista can do in the average Starbucks experience, and you don't get. And that roast is so dark. There are some coffees where I feel like, wow, they've roasted off that distinctive flavor.
And of course, Starbucks is inextricably linked to these frappuccino and blended with chocolate syrup and whipped cream and all this other stuff that has become, quote, coffee over the last 10 or so years. Is that just absolutely crazy to you that coffee has become these 600-calorie drinks? Or is it, hey, to each their own, you know?
There's a middle ground on this. And I'm going to choose a path that's a little bit controversial on both sides. On the one hand, if you're drinking coffee that is what the caramel macchiato that I had once, I ordered a macchiato, and a macchiato is actually is supposed to be, at least originally, was an espresso with a little bit of milk in it. It's perfect for someone like me. I don't mind a little milk taste, especially in the morning.
Sure.
And with the coffee, but I got this thing that was pre-sweetened and had all kinds of syrup, gooey. So
it's an abortion.
I don't care for. It's barely coffee. Certainly, it's coffee flavored, and certainly I do believe I believe the consumer should be able to decide what they want. I'm not for having a coffee legislation.
No, certainly not.
But definitely, on the other end, some of my friends and we get a lot of these people at CoffeeCon too, and I love them. Of course, they buy tickets, but they have an attitude that no one can have anything in their coffee. I suspect if these people were into chocolate, they'd be eating baker's chocolate.
Right. Yeah. It's the idea that you're affecting the sanctity and purity of the coffee if you put even a drop of sugar or a little bit of cream in it, which seems crazy. In the very limited time we have left, I want to get your thoughts on Keurig. I think Keurig is a disaster environmentally. I think Keurig is a disaster in terms of the coffee quality. And I think that it is incredibly overpriced on a price per pound basis when you look at Keurig. What do you think about Keurig type machines?
Well, the cost itself is, I'm going to go backwards. The cost is ridiculous. I mean, you can drink the coffee. I'm going to tell your audience, you can drink the coffee I drink, and I buy the most expensive coffee there is. And you are paying as much, if not more than I am, and you're getting kind of probably the lowest tier of at least specialty coffee.
Sure.
Meaning it's not great. Second of all, as far as the environmental aspect, the original product is horrible and inexcusable. Shocking that it came from a company that used to have such a great reputation in the specialty coffee business like Green Mountain. The third thing, however, there's a cure for that. There are some products now, even Melita makes a 100% recyclable product.
Right.
So just seek that out, do a little research. Everyone's got Google now, so you don't even have to buy a book of mine or something to find out. There are some responsible products out there that reduce the waste. The third thing is the taste. The taste is, think about where we were. We had machines that took 14 minutes to make a pot of coffee. People threw out most of it, hopefully. I don't know about the health effects of that coffee, but it didn't taste good. Keurig machine, if anything, under extracts. It doesn't have as much bitterness generally. However, it is inherently stale. And that is a problem. You've got to be a member of kind of our club, ideally want to grind your own beans.
Sure.
And you want beans that are roasted within 2 weeks. Let's go a month just to make it doable. But that's really, compared to Keurig cups that they're probably roasted a year ago when you see them in the supermarket. Yeah, it's a big difference.
Spot on analysis. Kevin, how many cups of coffee a day do you drink, out of curiosity?
I drink. I actually drink 2 in the morning. I usually have one after lunch, and I have one in the evening because I do a late shift where I always write at night. I like to write at night. It's quiet, dark.
All right. Kevin Sinnott, 4 cups of coffee a day. You heard it from him right here. Check out The Art and Craft of Coffee, and check out CoffeeCon, the Consumer Coffee Festival. Kevin, thanks for being on with us.
David, good luck.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get into audience questions. First question, David, we've got the World Cup going on. Do you think the World Cup is an acceptable form of nationalism? In short, yes. In short, yes. And there's an interesting study which questions whether qualifying for the World Cup makes countries more nationalistic and even potentially aggressive towards other countries in their geopolitics. I am not a nationalistic guy, right? I don't think that it's anything more than odds, whether you're born in one country or another. I talk so often about how equality of opportunity varies drastically based merely on who you happen to be born to and where you happen to be born. I happen to be born in Argentina, so I'm a fan of the Argentinian men's national team, which was very prematurely eliminated from this year's World Cup. And actually now really none of the teams I like are left. But putting that aside, I recognize that although my potential was arguably the same, whether my family had stayed in Argentina or come to the United States, that my opportunity to exercise that potential went up drastically because I ended up in the United States. There's no doubt of that. And there's sort of this sliding scale of nationalism, and we tend to see the right much more favorably seeing the more aggressive and jingoistic forms of nationalism. I get into the World Cup stuff, and in a sense, you know, whether it's an acceptable form of nationalism kind of depends on your personal politics. For me, it's more fun, and the idea of an allegiance that is not implicative of going to war or whatever else. But the truth is that there actually are a lot of politics wrapped up in the World Cup.
I think it's acceptable, though. I mean, we're not talking about racial superiority. We're not talking about who has the better military. We're just kicking a ball around after all. And I think if you say that it's not acceptable, then our, state championships, competitions where one state goes against another within the U.S., is that going to be acceptable too?
No, that's completely unacceptable.
Up a whole door.
That's completely politically incorrect, and there should be no pride whatsoever in your state. No, listen, I am not. I think that the left is often unfairly characterized as lacking all pride, and I hate to even use the term patriotism, but in a way, sort of accused of lacking patriotism. And I completely reject that. We talk about how when we criticize our healthcare system, it's not because we are unpatriotic. It's because we are trying to raise the country up to a higher standard. It's a different form of patriotism. And then when it comes to soccer, you can make the case that in a sense everything is political, that qualifying for the World Cup does create a sort of more aggressive geopolitical outlook. But I think that this is not a high priority, and there are much more concerning types of nationalism than merely saying, hey, my family's from Argentina. By the way, the U.S. didn't even make it, so I didn't even have a choice to make between the U.S. and Argentina. I'm going to root for Argentina. I think it's effectively harmless. And if somebody disagrees, I want to hear from you. Okay, we've got a voicemail audience question this week. Take a listen to this one that came in.
Hi, my name is Hunter, and I'm from Nebraska, the red state of Nebraska. I'm just wondering if either you or Patrick had to choose what red state to live in, which one would it be? Thank you.
Yeah. I am interpreting the question as which red state could you live in, assuming you can choose where in that red state you would live. And for me, it's very clear. I know you know what I'm going to say, right, Pat?
You're going to say Austin, Texas, or, maybe Asheville, North Carolina, one of those?
Absolutely incorrect. I am going to say I would choose the red state of Florida. And as wacky and unorganized and lacking infrastructure as Florida is, I would live in Miami. Miami, I would say, is my favorite red state city in the country.
You're going to call Florida a red state? I think it's still up for grabs. I think it's a purple state. Voted for Obama twice after all, right?
I still call Florida a red state because despite the occasional Democratic presidential vote, the state legislature is very right, and big picture, it's a right wing state. And I would, if forced to live in a red state, 100% go to Miami.
Yeah, Miami's not a bad pick if we're going to qualify that as a red state. I think I would go with maybe Montana or Wyoming.
Really?
I would just go completely off the grid, get rid of this city living type thing I've been doing for a while.
Yep.
Enjoy the national parks out there, live on my own. It would be a whole new look for me.
I'm sure if you did that, you would no longer be vegan because you would capture your own game, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would be part of the lifestyle.
Yeah.
Of course.
All right, well,
Killing everything.
Pat would go to Montana or Wyoming. I would go to Miami, Florida. Certainly could not be more different in terms of personality as far as that goes. On the bonus show today, we will talk about Congressman Jim Jordan being accused of ignoring allegations of sexual abuse while coaching wrestling at Ohio State. We will talk about the untimely passing of former MSNBC host Ed Schultz at age 64. And we will also talk about Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, saying that he might challenge Donald Trump for president in 2020. What is that all about? Those stories and more on today's bonus show. 2 ways to access it. Become a member at joinpacman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.